In 1985, a Brazilian trade union leader once said that World War III had already started. This war is tearing down Latin America and practically all the Third World. Instead of soldiers dying, there are children. Instead of millions of wounded, there are millions of unemployed. It is a war by the US against the Latin American continent and the Third World. A war over foreign debt, one in which the main weapon is interest, a weapon more deadly than the atomic bomb, he said. In the present context, similar remarks may perhaps be made about China's Belt and Road Initiative, being an exercise in debt trap diplomacy such that the interest component of debt brings many developing countries to their knees. Impoverished countries have been forced to take out loans with China at an interest rate of up to 17% because they don't have much choice, since loans from the private sector are charging interest rates of up to 55%. The Jesuit economist Bernard Dempsey was of the view that in the West, usury, the charging of disproportionate amounts of interest is so prevalent that it has become ingrained in Western economies. Dempsey developed his own theory of financial crises, which he attributed to the presence of what he termed institutional usury. So when does the charging of interest cross the line and become usury? The Catholic doctor St. Thomas Aquinas, as well as the Protestant theologian John Calvin, distinguish between commercial loans made for business ventures on the one hand, and personal loans made to assist people in difficulty on the other hand. The Old Testament prohibitions against usury are directed towards the latter of these two. We find critiques of the practice of charging usury throughout the scriptures and into the early church. However, these criticisms tend to focus on the exploitation of the poor, presenting usury as a sin against charity, rather than an inherently unjust practice. Charging a rate of interest simply for the right to use money is immoral for Aquinas. What needs to be established is some other title to a return on investment for the borrower. Some theologians, working hand in hand with crafty merchants and lawyers, were able to devise various substitutes which allowed for a return of both the principal of the loan and a guaranteed return for the lender. These titles to legitimate interest arise from what late scholastic moral theologians called lucrum cessans and damnum emergens. Lucrum cessans refers to what we would typically call today opportunity cost, the loss arising from the lost opportunity of the lender to invest the same money in a profit-making venture. However, Aquinas is more reluctant to allow this form of compensation because one must not sell that which he has not yet, and may be prevented in many ways from having. If we turn now to the other title for a return on investment, damnum emergens, this refers to the loss or damage a lender might suffer if he or she did not have access to their money for the duration of the loan. Furthermore, if a lender retains ownership of the money lent and can have no recourse to anything else the borrower has to recover the amount lent, then the lender has effectively entered into a partnership with the borrower and can demand a share of the gains generated by the investment of the money lent. Islamic finance operates on the basis of such a principle. Over and above these, Aquinas permits the charging of service and administration fees to process the loan. So if we put all these together, we could say that a just amount of interest would equate to, at the very least, the inflation rate plus a service and administration charge. Interest over and above this would depend on the amount of risk the lender has taken on in the wealth-generating projects which arise from investment of the money borrowed. These principles were put into effect in the so-called Montes Pietatis, which were institutions usually sponsored by the government or the church, which provided low-interest loans to borrowers who would leave a pledge to cover the possibility of the loan not being repaid. These institutions had their critics, but the Church in the Fifth Lateran Council in 1515 gave approval to such ventures despite opposition by the Thomistic commentator Cardinal Cajetan. In 1745, the most extensive papal pronouncement on the topic of usury was made in the encyclical Vix Pervenit. It reiterated the traditional condemnation of usury, but permitted the charging of certain fees which are extrinsic and run parallel to the loan contract. The charging of interest, therefore, within the limits defined by civil law was allowed, and would be reiterated in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. More recently, in the 2009 encyclical Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict XVI, responding to the global financial crisis, reiterated the need to help the more vulnerable members of our society from usury. In particular, he praises the use of microfinancing, which is provided to unemployed or low-income individuals who would otherwise have no other access to financial services. Microfinance is based on the principles of the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity, three major principles in Catholic social teaching. In the same section of the encyclical, the English version, when speaking of the experience of microfinance, goes on to make mention of the birth of pawnbroking. The Latin text of the encyclical uses the expression de montibus pietatis constitutes. This opens up the possibility for commercial investments within the bounds of what is just and equitable. In this respect, I believe that income streams from property and shares would be more in keeping with Catholic social teaching than purely fixed interest investments. John Maynard Keynes was thinking along similar lines when he advocated for fiscal stimulus measures over monetary policy maneuvers to either stimulate or cool down the economy. With interest rates presently at historic lows of just above 0%, reality has caught up with the economy, which has been wounded by institutional usury. Economic and moral recovery now depend on individual and commercial investors doing more lifting and less leaning on speculative and usurious gains. Wall Street must learn once again that the way of the cross is the only way to true riches.